Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Doctor Who Guide. Today, I'm super excited to be interviewing a very special guest who has worked with me on my story. I was lucky enough to have this wonderful illustrator, Kris, work on my story in the Doctor Who 1997 annual. Kris, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, nice to see you. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about that whole process. It's been a lot of work, but I think what we collaborated on turned out pretty great. So,
All right, so here we have, oh my gosh, this beautiful triptych. And I remember talking with you about this, how we wanted to you know, give each of these characters their own moment and their own illustrations. And I think that originally, correct me if I'm wrong, but we had envisioned this as just like a single half-page illustration with the three,
yes.
panels. But then it grew into, because the story I wrote was uh, let's just say not as short as the original brief said it should be. But I'm so glad I sent it in and it was like longer than what the brief had said, but I said if they want me to cut it down, I will. But I just feel like there was, I I asked for what's the expression? Asked for forgiveness rather than permission. So I just sent
Yep.
it in its long form, and so it was decided. I believe that these would become larger illustrations than just what the three of them side by side on one page would have been, and to be on their kind of near the respective or on their respective pages in the short story. So on the left, we've got Stacy confronting, her fiance who's been converted by a Cyberman. And I mean, really, each of them are going through their own trials. And as we sent them deeper and deeper into the TARDIS, and I knew that the TARDIS would be, the defenses would be up. I wanted to, kind of tap into each character and figure out what their sort of greatest fears and regrets were in life. And so I went back to the comics to that Radio Time strip and tried to see like what would be fresh in these characters' minds, what would be their dark places, their traumas. And my gosh, in Doctor Who, if you look at it from what the companions go through and how it's every episode near death experiences, there's a lot of
So
trauma
much.
that
Yeah.
that we kind of pass over, that they're definitely going to be talking to a therapist for years about everything they've been going through. And so this was a very traumatic experience for Stacy, and I wanted to kind of address that because in the original comic format, everything had to go by so quickly. And so I mean that illustration, I mean, just captures it wonderfully. I mean, there's just the emotion in their faces, the way that they're she's not fully able to look at him. I mean, there's a lot of emotion there, and I love it.
Yeah, no, I loved illustrating these panels in particular because I think that is also one of the things that's glossed over in Doctor Who that they should probably dive into a bit more is that like, sometimes the big enemy that we have to fight really is just like these harrowing experiences and all of the times that interpersonal relationships have gone astray. So I don't know, this is one of my favorite parts to illustrate was, these interactions because they got me to my core. I could just imagine how upsetting it was for all of these characters to face these regrets in their life.
Right, right. And for Sard, I was trying to think. It was pretty easy to come up with Stacy's situation. A little harder for the Doctor, but I think for Sard, I kind of looked back at this moment in the comic strip where if it hadn't have been for another Ice Warrior, uh, you know, who saved Stacy's life, she wouldn't be in the picture. And he, not only are they both companions of the Doctor, but there's a relationship that forms between them. And so I thought, imagine that guilt as an Ice Warrior. Like you're supposed, they're an honorable race, they're a courageous race. And so that's kind of what he's fighting here, is this kind of this standstill, this it wasn't a fight or flight response, it was just a state of shock. And we've all had moments in our lives where like you almost can't react to something or something quick enough. And so, he's kind of fighting that battle of this physical manifestation of, are you going to be able to fight for the things that you love when it comes down to it? So, I mean, and I love the rays behind as well, just that, and the way you've textured the reptilian armor of the ice warriors. And I mean, it almost, their hands almost remind me of Legos,
Yeah,
like the
no,
Lego
I
hands.
really wanted to keep that design because it changes over time, but the classic Who Lego hand has always been very special to me. So you have this intense scene, but still a Lego claw, but I think it works.
Definitely, definitely. And I think it's Tussock is the name of the one that's being fought there.
Yes.
So, um, and actually, I'd like to ask you a question on this. I've always assumed that it is Sard who's the one whose face that we can see attacking the other ice warrior. Am I correct in that, or is it the other way around? Is
Yes,
it
the one that we are looking at is Sard.
awesome?
If
Awesome.
so, that's him
I'm
front and center. I wanted this to like, in the order that it's organized, like they're all emotionally heavy moments, but since Sard has that moment of like physical response, I felt like that's a highlight moment for me. Like when I was reading it, so I
absolutely.
thought it would be best to highlight that while illustrating as well.
Yeah, and I love that you came with, suggestions for moments that stood out for you. And, one of the things we both had, because I think most of the other stories got, I think because of the length of this story, it required a couple more illustrations. And so we both struggled to like narrow it down to like what scenes did we want to illustrate, what were the most important. And so it was very cool to hear, what you had thought was important. What was your process for creating this third image of the Doctor and Susan?
So with the Doctor and Susan, they break my heart all the time, just like thinking about that whole situation. But for me, their moment of just like talking, this is before, the reveal of, Susan not being Susan, but it's just like this hesitant regret, I guess, in the Doctor's face. That's kind of what I was going for with like the hand kind of reaching back. Because I think deep down, the Doctor would also know straight away that this isn't real. It kind of doesn't even feel like tangible. I guess when I was doing these illustrations, I was also very deep in my season 10 of New Who fixation. And in the pilot of season 10, you have the 12th Doctor reminiscing on Susan and how Bill reminds him of her. And I feel like that was very much in the forefront of my mind as well. So it's kind of like that photograph on the Doctor's desk, but if it came to life, being forced to face that regret like head on is it's just so much. I don't know. It
Right.
this part of the story was heartbreaking for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And that the reason that I tied it in is because we couldn't we couldn't reference anything in the future that had happened, post the TV movie, so
Yep.
that's why everything that was one of the guidelines for you as an illustrator, for me as a writer, it's nothing post uh, you know, the TV movie. But because of all the work that had been done in the expanded universe that says that the first Doctor to ever reunite actually with Susan was the eighth Doctor, and we don't get an explanation as to like why the other Doctors didn't go back and visit her. Um, I wanted to kind of take a moment to like plant the seed in the Doctor's mind that like maybe I should go and visit her
I
again.
love
And so
that.
that's kind of because I knew I couldn't actually bring her there, and I knew that there would be these illusions, but I wanted to like pay homage to those stories by saying like, okay, well maybe this is the impetus, the thing that gets him to say, well maybe I should really you know have that in my mind. And I know like Big Finish has done an Eighth Doctor and Susan, and different various formats have done their own thing. So I didn't want to rewrite the continuity that was to come that I couldn't mention, but I did want to focus on those. And I just noticed now that you did the red lighting in all three of them.
Yes. I wanted to
It's that
carry that like
attention to detail.
visually. Yeah, I wanted to like, I wanted that to be the big highlight in Sard's one, but it's important to like make sure that all of these connected, color palette wise, just to make it feel a little more cohesive. And now, especially since they're going to be on different pages, it's just like that little thing. So when you're flipping through pages, you subconsciously still connect those three images together.
I love that. I love that. Just great because it could be emergency warning lights in the TARDIS. It could just be this wonderful color scheme that's pulling through. I also see like a light blue kind of teal as well as a highlight. I love that.
Thank you.
Oh, great. And then how you know brought Susan to life was just incredible. The way that you illustrated her, I mean, just I love it. Obviously, older, grown up, but still got that you know youthfulness that you can kind of still see because in our minds, you know, we always view her as the young Susan who gets left in the Dalek invasion of Earth, and yet she's grown up, and how are you going to illustrate that? Amazing. So
Thank
I
you.
could
I
waffle.
actually only had one reference photo for older Susan from that one Big Finish cover that she's on.
Yes,
So I
yes.
kind of had to like hunt for details in her outfit and search up other images of Carol Ann Ford to figure out maybe what she would look like. And I looked at like profile photos from her when she was younger to try and figure out like what the side of her face looks like. And I had to combine a lot of images for that. So that was tricky.
That's amazing. And so was there like with the because I want to touch on the first process for the first panel as well because so what went into creating that? Were there any challenges or like you were saying hunting down reference images?
Yeah, absolutely. For Bill and Stacy, it was very tricky since, or especially for Bill, since they only have a couple of comic panels and it's like for that old Cyberman armor as well. I had to like find as many like low quality re-uploads of these comics as I could and just kind of piece it together from all of these different angles. So that was a very tricky aspect of illustrating this. Like actually drawing the images doesn't take that much time. Like you'll see in the time lapse later, a good half of my process is just gathering the references and sketching in a way that is actually communicating what I want. So the construction process for these was particularly long because of the lack of other visual references that are out there.
Right, right. I mean, this whole annual is based off of companions created in a limited comic strip run that uh, has not been published since its appearance in the Radio Times, and so uploads of it online are few and far between. So I think it's really impressive you've managed to create such a an authentic recreation in these different positions.
Thank you. I'm really excited to see what the other artists of the annual have also created, since this will probably be like the most amount of art of these characters that are out there. Because while I was looking, there's not that many other fan art interpretations of them either, which is something I like to look at. I like to see how other fan artists like me have interpreted other characters. I use that as part of my research process, but there's none for these characters. There's like I think I saw one piece of Stacy and Zard, but that's really it. There's not much out there.
Yeah, that was what was so exciting because, Gary Russell kindly gave, Trackways distributors the permission in this annual to write for these characters, and, by extension, uh, to also, draw them. And so it was just such an honor to write for these characters who, you know, the Radio Times comics are it. There's no extended universe beyond it. And so as you're saying, even from the artwork standpoint, there's not a lot of fan art out there.
Yeah, no, it's an exciting concept. I think that's part of the reason why I really love these annuals because of things like that.
Yeah. Awesome. So let's check out some of the other designs. Oh my gosh, this is so
Yeah.
fun.
All right. Here we go. Okay, so next I believe we have the Doctor confronting the Master, my personal favorite Doctor Who character.
Amazing. I
So
mean,
that was just so fun to do.
I love the just the energy that you got across, like in the hand, in the face, that flamboyance, but you've also picked up on, the where this Eric Roberts master would be. He's a little bit, he's been through a lot. He's been through a lot. It's not his, TV movies that was a little bit more
Not in his
ragged, but
prime.
and then the coloring that you did with his robe and getting the Time Lord robe there, amazing the way it hangs off of him. And I remember we talked about like how we wanted to position this, whether it was going to be like a side by side or at an angle. And I definitely wanted an over the shoulder, but you still have the Eighth Doctor there with his reaction as well. I love that. Talk me through this.
Yes, so this was so fun to draw since the Master's probably like one of my most drawn characters of all time in any of their forms, but one that I haven't drawn was the movie version of the Master. And I had actually that year was the first time I'd seen the TV movie. Now I've seen it like 4 times, but this version of the Master was fresh in my mind, so that was my first time drawing him. But I do try to carry, the same energy throughout all of my different drawings. Whether it's Delgado or Sim Master or Gomez, I try and carry all of that through. So I had a lot of fun applying those same like body movements and things like that into this piece. But this is one of the easier ones to do since there were a good amount of references. So I just kind of got to have fun, which was a great time.
Love that. I love that. I mean, the master originally, I was just reading about this actually, created um through a collaboration with Terrence Dix and Barry Letts. They were talking about they wanted to give the Doctor, they saw him as the Sherlock Holmes and they wanted to give him a Moriarty, a
Yep.
recurring villain. And I think it was Barry Letts who said, we may have overused him in the first season because they had him in every
In every
of the
single
five.
serial.
And so the audience, he said, started to know that he'd be in every episode and be looking for him. And so the reveal was no longer, so in future seasons they cut down on his appearances so you couldn't guess that he would be in every episode. But it was just wonderful to write for the master because, as you say, at the end of the TV movie they really keep it open that you hear this sort of indigestion running through the TARDIS, and it's that little
I love
hint
that.
that the master is still there. And so I wanted to follow up on that because there's a lot of different ways that the story of the master is picked up on after this point to get him into the master that enters into the Time War that we see as the War Master and Derek Jacobi's master, and then into the John Sim. But that transition is very strange and on screen is never communicated. Like, how did he go from being stuck in the TARDIS in this like, slime ball form to getting into Derek Jacobi? It's so
Yeah.
comics addressed it. I think, audios address it, books address it. And so I wanted to kind of take take my own stab at it, but instead of rewriting that future continuity, kind of wrap it all back kind of into the same place that it was at the beginning of the story. And so that's just really fun to see that. And I love the eyes too. That just
Thank you. Yeah, and in my mind, yes, it's the essence of a snake and whatnot, but to me, when the master is part cat in survival, I like to think that some of that never left. So to me, they're also a little bit like cat eyes. It's just, I guess, a little joke I make with myself sometimes, but yeah, the eyes are
I
always a
love
fun part to
that.
draw with the master.
I love that. I love knowing that reference, because yes, I do see that feline aspect to the eyes, and he does turn into this deathworm morphin, and it's wonderful, and I love that idea that he's still like part cat. That's never quite
Even
shook
just a
that,
little bit. And
because
I'm
you're right,
so
we're
glad
not.
that Ace mentioned it in Power of the Doctor. I made a bingo board for Power of the Doctor of things that I either thought would happen or things I really, really wanted. And one of them was Ace calls out the Master for being part cat. And I think I tweeted it like a week before the episode came out. And when, like last time I saw you, you were half cat, I screamed. Like, thankfully
Ah!
she mentioned it. It was amazing.
I love that. Oh my gosh, it must have been awful watching the episode with me because I was constantly explaining the references. But my
Yep.
family was very understanding. And I love that reference. I'm like, that's from Survival, and so yeah, you're right. The bridge between Anthony Ainley's Survival Master turning into a cat and should be dead, and then whoever the master was that we see briefly, we don't see the face, so could have still been a cat under there,
We'll
but
never
being
know.
exterminated by the Daleks. I love
Yep.
that reference. I love that. It's that attention to detail that's just I love, and you'll see that throughout the annual, yeah, I'm sure, and everything else. But I love that you brought that as well. Oh my gosh, let's get on to the next one.
Yeah, there's so much to look at. So this is that final scene where, the Master, the Deathworm Morphin, is being sucked back into the Eye of Harmony, and we've got Stacy and Start, and this was, as we can see, it's upside down. So this was a difficult one to make.
Yes, I remember, and that was a like it all made such sense in my mind, but having to explain the plot like to my dad, and he helped me, like, he read through the story and helped, give me the perspective of a reader, because when you've written it, everything makes sense. So
Yep.
you can't see the blind spots of like what doesn't. And so this was a part that I had to work very hard to make sure that it all made sense. And it is quite, literally topsy-turvy. And so I love that we have this back and forth of going, how do we want to represent this? And what is exactly going on here? And so, I mean, it's amazing. Essentially, the Deathworm Morphant launches itself out of the Eye of Harmony, breaking free, but then the Doctor flips the TARDIS over so that its momentum shoots it right back in. So it's
Yep.
a very almost, I guess almost comical solution to the situation, but it harkened back to the beginning where the Doctor is working on the gravity of the TARDIS and the gravity settings, and it was just a nice way to harken back to it, because I did reach a point in the story where it's like, okay, I've got them all into a ton of trouble. How do I get them all out of the trouble? Because I did not know that once, by the time I had written it up to that point. And so I was just sort of
Yeah.
walking around going, how am I going to solve this? And then that came to mind. And so, oh my gosh, and I love how you've drawn the Deathworm Morphin as well. So again, talk me through it. The lighting on through the grating, just
Thank you. This was a tricky one for me. So I did draw it, face up, and then I would flip the illustration over and sketch in the characters. But the first part was just getting that perspective down. And we'll see on the game board page that I do a much more technical drawing of this room and the architecture. But this one, I did want to keep the background a bit more freeform, because it was just going to be, I think, the focus here is the characters. I didn't want to get too far into it, but I did want to keep some little details like the lighting coming in through that window in the background hitting the stairs, and that has a bit of like a reflection. There's just a lot of little things in the design of this whole room that I thought were like important to keep in mind, because I love the architecture of that set.
Mhm.
So I wanted to communicate it in as few shapes as possible, but still get the vital information in there. So it was tricky, and there's like a lot of different blending modes, they're called, in art programs. Like, so the colors don't just go right on top of each other. They like, I don't know, it's a whole math thing. I don't really understand it, but I had to play with a lot of different blending modes when coloring in the Deathworm Morphin, since it's translucent, transparent. It's like a whole thing, and it has this faint glow to it, and when things glow, it interacts differently. So I had to mess with a lot of different techniques, but I had a great time doing it. And I love making things glow. That's my favorite thing to do. And like coloring the line art to add that edge light is always really fun. So that rim of white towards the top is like always one of my favorite parts to add to art pieces. So it was a lot of work, but a lot of fun. It was a very experimental piece for me, I think.
Oh, it's so cool. I mean, I do love how it, it's got that see-through, but kind of, I don't know, milky transparency to it. And just, the highlighting too just really helps separate the background and the foreground. And, you've got Sard hanging on for dear life there, but if anybody can hang on, and also hold on to another person, I was like, okay, this makes sense that an ice warrior would be able to,
Yeah,
to keep them
you
hanging
can
on
power
while the
through.
TARDIS is literally, spinning around them. And I also, the idea of the TARDIS, we see it in the time vortex, like hurtling head over heels, throughout the time vortex. And yes, we do see the people inside hanging on and being affected by the momentum. But if you imagine, I think, it was almost, I think I want to say it was a novelization that described it as, dice being hurtled through space in the time vortex, like the TARDIS is
Wow.
rolling
Yeah,
over and over and over. And you're like, if they did not have some sort of, uh,
stabilizer,
gravity
something.
that's, yeah, holding them, that stop, they would be bouncing around in there and like crazy. So I loved playing around with that idea of like what would happen if that was turned off and you had some
Terrifying.
other some other gravity that's, or if some of it was turned off. So yeah, I love how you illustrated that. And it was very important to illustrate that scene because I thought it's probably going to be the most confusing one for the reader to visualize. And that was really important to do. So thank you,
Yeah,
great job.
I agree that that scene, when I first read through it, that was a tricky one for me to get into my head, but once I got it and now that's on paper, I feel like that scene will just it'll click for people. So I think that's super exciting because it's such a cool concept. I think it's
Thank you.
so
Yeah,
fun.
it's almost like if you took a snow globe, when you and turn it over upside down really
Yeah,
quickly, and you know the snow will still go in the same direction and stuff. So that's cool.
so fun. Okay, is it time for the game board page?
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes.